Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell. You may be able to tell from my voice that I'm a little sick, and yet the show must go on. I have another DLC proposal that I've been working on. You've probably guessed what it was if you've been following the channel's recent content, so without further ado, I present to you Highlands of ANAHUAC, featuring the following Mesoamerican civilizations. First, the Purépecha, which I did a build on well over a year ago. 2, the Zapotecs, another build that I did well in the past. 3, the Mixtecs, a more recent feature on this channel. And 4, the Chontals, a semi-remake of the Mayans, the most recent build on the channel. Huge thanks, as always, to Arjun Ulas for the beautiful cover art. Check out his Instagram in the speaker notes of this slide in the presentation, linked below, as well as to Ahmicqui for his fantastic historical consultancy. It's because of him that these Mesoamerican civilizations are as historically authentic and faithful as they are. Also thanks to my mod squad for checking my work with implementability as always. Mesoamerica is, of course, one of the most requested locations for AoE2 DLCs to return to, and so it was really only a matter of time before I did something like this on the channel. In case you're new to my work, take a look on screen right now to see my approach to doing theory crafting for Age of Empires 2. I focus on historical authenticity. I go for boundary pushing, but technically implementable designs, and I am a hobbyist, not a historian, though I do have the fantastic Ahmicqui on board for this project to help check my work. If you want to see my image credits, you can check the speaker notes of this presentation. And if you want to support me, you can comment, like, and subscribe, join the Discord, or support me on Ko-Fi, linked in the description down below. Let's begin with some general additions to the game that this hypothetical DLC would bring, beginning with some flavor adds. First of all, some wild animals. You know the javelinas that are currently in the game? Well, those would be better termed collared peccaries, and they should look a little more like this. I also propose that we have another bird besides the macaw, as much as I love macaws, specifically the resplendent quetzal. Absolutely gorgeous bird that was very important to Mesoamerican cultures. I also propose a couple of new architecture sets, though, admittedly, architecture sets are very hard to implement in a mod, and as such, this is wishful thinking rather than something that I would be dead set on. I would love to see the Mesoamerican architecture set be overhauled to be less mossy and nasty and split into Nahua architecture for the Aztecs and Purépecha, though the Purépecha were not a Nahua people, Oaxacan architecture for the Mixtecs and Zapotecs, and Mayan architecture for the Chontals, current Mayans, and any other Mayan states down the line. While these architecture sets would likely look similar to each other, they could easily be made very visually distinct, and in reality had a number of major distinguishing factors between them that I would love to see accounted for in-game, such as Mayan temple complexes being painted red most often. Beyond that, we have some regionals to talk about. You may remember I did quite a lot of regional work in some of my recent builds, introducing the Jaguar Warrior, Slinger, and Atlatl as regional units for all Mesoamerican factions, with the Jaguar Warrior being kind of a stand-in for heavy elite Mesoamerican infantry that often wore Jaguar-style costumes. You can see my Mixtecs build for details on this, though it was included in the Chontals as well. All of these 3 units will be available to all civilizations in this DLC, as well as the Aztecs and plenty of others yet unmade. In addition, I also had a couple of Mayan regionals that I presented on my Chontals build, namely the Yaxche Plaza and the Ritual Boxer. These would only be available to the Chontals and Mayans, but they are set up for future Maya civilizations down the line, of which I have several planned. The last regional that I have planned is the Fortified Temple. But Robbie, you talked about this in your Mountain Royals remake. Yes, I did, but there has been a recent development. With the coming of the Chronicles DLC, individually upgrading specific single buildings is now completely viable. And as such, I can properly list out the details for how my planned fortified temple change would work. So, as compared to a current fortified church, fortified temples would be upgraded from specific monasteries for a one-time cost of 75 wood and 100 stone. This would not blanket upgrade all of the monasteries you had on the map. It would get one at a time. It would take 40 seconds to do. This would have more HP, armor, and attack than current fortified churches, and would shoot a single arrow even when ungarrisoned, just like a tower, though of note it would have less range than a tower. Garrisoned relics would also guaranteed add 1 more arrow each. Now, the name would also change based on the architecture set. I have this called the Fortified Temple, as opposed to the Fortified Church, because it's a little more universalizable. Also a new icon, which I think is a little more universal. So, now you have a better idea of how my Fortified Temple would look in practice, and it will make more sense when you see it applied to a civilization in this video, which focuses very heavily on this building, I should note. Let's lastly talk about some LAVAnte-Garde stuff. If you're new to my content, LAVAnte-Garde refers to stuff that goes beyond what the game can currently do, or is just a little too boundary pushing or substantial of a change. For example, a whole bunch of new tech-free regional ads, which I talked about in my How Much Can We Add to Mesoamerica video. Go check that out if you haven't yet. You can take a look at those on screen right now. I want to briefly highlight that in my How Much Can We Add to Mesoamerica video, I used the word Ashamencha when I meant Tlamakazki, so apologies for that. There's also a couple options here that you'll see that I referred to originally in my Chontals video, but I'm not going to go into depth on them here for time's sake. A couple things I didn't mention in any videos would be, for example, the Kalpishki, which was a regional governor in Nahua-style societies, which would kind of replace my old idea for a Tlatoani, which was more of an emperor, like a supreme commander. Last thing I want to talk about for LAVAnte-Garde for now would be additional civilizations that I considered adding to this DLC. You can see all of these in my How Much Can We Add to Mesoamerica video as well. For example, the Tlaxcaltecs, the Nahua rivals of the Aztecs, as well as the Otomi, a non-Nahua people of central Mexico, and the Toltecs, the classical era Nahua umbrella civilization. All three of these are very high priority Mesoamerican civilizations that could have fit well in this DLC. Some less obvious ones would include the Cuauhtemalan, which would be the highland Maya, both the Quiche and the Cachiquel peoples, the Cholans, representing the classical era Maya heyday, and the Yucatecs, representing the post-collapse League of Mayapan in the Yucatan Peninsula. This is just a short list of all the awesome Mesoamerican civilizations that could feature in a Meso DLC, but these and the others that I didn't feature fit less well into the overall kind of story and aesthetic that I'm trying to pitch for this particular expansion. So if you want to see a more comprehensive look at Mesoamerica that might feature some of the more like popular and common civilizations to add, go make sure to take a look at my How Much Can We Add to Mesoamerica video whenever you can. Now, let's move on to the Mixtecs. This beautiful art, again, courtesy of Arjun Ulas, featuring Lord 8Deer in all his glory. I did the Mixtecs very recently on this channel, and you guys gave me some great feedback as always. So I have a couple of changes that I've made to the build. First of all, the Castle Age unique technology has been renamed to Yukunduta, which is their word for a city-state. Thanks to Ahmicqui for managing to trawl up that word for me somehow. I've also increased the stone trickle that is given by Yukunduta by double. Shoutouts to Anzu in the Discord for mathing that out. Next change is the anti-building archers bonus has been shifted to the Imperial Age unique technology instead of revealing fortifications on the map. Instead, their archers get a bonus versus siege from baseline, which is quite scary. Yes, I am aware it makes their archers very oppressive against mangonels. Bear in mind that their main archer line is not very strong, and this effect is mostly focused on their skirmishers and especially their atlatls. So you can't just use mangoes to counterplay their atlatls. I've also given them bowsaw, which was a pretty penalizing miss they had on the original build, and I've also specified that their secondary unique unit, the Yaha Yahweh, cannot be converted until an enemy researches atonement. So a couple of substantial changes. I could see the siege thing being maybe a little too good, but we'll see. Thanks again for your feedback, everyone. Now, let's take a look at the Chontals, the most recent build on the channel. We see Tabskub here portrayed, again by Arjun. Thanks for the gorgeous artwork, my friend. You guys have, as always, given me some good feedback for this one as well, but I'm glad to say that we don't have nearly as many changes here. One of the first ones we change is that missed shots from the unique Zabin Khatun unit now deal full damage. It has not great accuracy, so this should help. The food bonus that they get now only applies to economic buildings, but gives twice as much as it did previously. So economic buildings, including farms, by the way, give 10 food. This should make their early game quite a bit better, giving them like well over, I think, 100 food in Dark Age alone for free, and giving them some like incremental benefits down the line as well. I've also followed the advice of Ahmicqui and some other commenters by changing their team bonus to giving resistance to siege and gunpowder rather than bonus damage, though their unique Zabin Khatun still deals minor bonus damage to both of the above. This is a very unusual team bonus that should help archers survive mangonel shots. It pairs beautifully with the Mixtecs as it happens. And I think it represents the history a little bit better and is a little more implementable than I was initially worried it would be. I've also removed pikemen from this civilization to emphasize their weakness against cavalry. Huge nerf, but they do gain plate mail armor in return, so their late game elite infantry spam should still be very, very strong. Overall, I'm quite happy with the changes, and I'm very grateful for everyone who contributed ideas. Now, let's move on to one of my first major rebuilds, the Zapotecs. You see on screen right now Zacila the First, who I'll talk a bit about later. To briefly discuss my original build, it was the 11th I ever did on the channel, and the second most popular LAVAnte-Garde design I ever made. The original design was kind of imbalanced and a little overtuned, but it had some cool ideas, and I did kind of predict the fortified church before it was officially released. I think it was a good first try for a Mesoamerican build, especially before I actually had a consultant on board, so I'd give myself a C. It was alright. But here's what I've done to redesign it. These Zapotecs, a defensive and monk civilization. Universities provide between 5 and 10% work rate to villagers within 8 tiles. Quite a powerful eco bonus, similar to the current Georgians fortified church bonus, though I will note I came up with this idea and design before the official Georgians were released. This bonus refers to how much of a scientific and cultural powerhouse the Zapotec regions were, leading to wild prosperity among them in the classical era of Mesoamerica, so before like 900 AD. They were in many ways the hub of Mesoamerica before the classical era collapse. Second bonus, upgrading monasteries to fortified temples cost no wood. They had very extensive temple complexes that doubled as major defensive hubs, so it made a lot of sense to me that they would get a fortified temple bonus of some kind, though in retrospect this feels a little on the weak side. Maybe I could buff it up by making it take half the time as well as costing no wood, or maybe costing no stone. What do you guys think? Third bonus, monks cost minus 6% gold for each researched monastery technology, and they have a maxed out monastery, meaning that their monks can get 66% cheaper. And this is referring to the massive religious centers that were at the heart of the Zapotec city-states, as well as their very extensive priestly caste. I actually debated stealing the Aztec monk HP bonus for this civilization, but I think that this cost discounting one makes a little bit more sense and is quite exciting, as you'll see when it's comboed with a later element of their design. Fourth bonus, researching masonry and architecture yields 200 and 300 gold, respectively, referring to the beautiful mural work and religious infrastructure likely contributing to massive tourism by pilgrims. The Zapotec city-states had tons of foot traffic, both because of their stranglehold on trade as well as their religious significance. So this kind of confluence of trade and infrastructure and religion all coming together is what I was kind of trying to represent here, and with this build overall. Again, another incentive for them to go defensive and giving them some more gold for monks. Their team bonus allows university, masonry, and treadmill crane to be available in feudal age and cost minus 40%. When I was discussing these Zapotecs with Ahmicqui, he mentioned that one of his lecturers described them as the first true Mesoamerican state. They were enormously influential and effectively laid the groundwork for the rest of Central America for the next 1,000+ years. And because of that, and their trailblazing nature, and their huge technological breakthroughs very early in relevance to their neighbors, I felt that having them unlock the university and some key defensive technologies made a lot of sense. And also combos so well with their aura bonus and their masonry architecture bonus and others besides. Now, they do get all of the regionals that I described earlier besides the Maya ones, and they also, of course, get the fortified temple, which they do have a substantial incentive to build. And speaking of that incentive, let's move on to their unique unit, the AoE2. This is a heavy infantry trained at the castle for 20 food and 80 gold, quite pricey. Its stats, however, are very substantial, having the same tankiness as a knight, though dramatically lower speed, as slow as a Teutonic knight. Their attack is also very good, very similar to a knight once again, and they do have a bonus versus buildings. Most notably, however, they have an aura, pretty short range, only 6 tiles, that causes enemy units to lose 5 HP per minute, which doesn't sound like much, but this stacks up to 30 times, meaning that if you have 30 AoE2, enemies who are within 6 tiles of all of them lose 150 HP per minute, which is the same as a monk's healing rate, but in reverse. So obviously that means that if you have a big doom stack of these guys, your enemies are going to be screwed if they just come crunching in with no game plan whatsoever. To compare it to a Teutonic Knight, the AoE2 is way scarier in numbers thanks to the aura, and it's cheaper, especially after a unique technology we'll get into later, and it's more resistant to arrow fire because of its added HP. The Teutonic Knight completely destroys the AoE2 in terms of its melee armor, however, and the AoE2 also has much worse DPS, worse bonus damage, and worse train time. So though they have many similarities, the two units do play very differently. The name Be'ewe is a rough translation of Macaw Guardian, which was the original name that I gave to this unit. And the Zapotec war god often took the guise of a macaw, with Zapotec elite infantry seeming to have often served as temple guards and elite religious escorts, as well as a wartime vanguard. Enough so that I at one point actually debated having the Be'ewe be a unit that's got huge buffs when fighting near a temple or a castle. After putting out the ritual boxer though, it felt a little redundant with that, so I decided to go with this HP drain effect instead, which not only plays really well with their general strategy, since Zapotec elites seem to have been very slow and heavily armored compared to their early contemporaries, but it also seems like Zapotec armies used intimidation tactics as often as they actually fought, scaring off enemies or baiting them into attacking recklessly, hence my proposed aura. You're demoralizing your enemies before they actually get to fight you, which allows this unit to be the ultimate zone controller, which I think plays really interestingly with how slow and tanky it is. The Be'ewe can be upgraded to Elite and Imperial Age for a whopping 1,000 food and 450 gold. Its stats are pretty decently improved, gaining a notable plus 20 HP and 1 pierce armor, a little more line of sight, a little less training time, more attack, and plus 1 to their aura radius, though of note the aura does not get more dangerous. Still, you can stack it more effectively this way, meaning that a big doom stack of Be'ewe at full elite upgrades is going to be very tough to deal with unless your opponent can flatten them with siege, pepper them with arrow fire, or retreat behind their own walls, which won't be safe for long. Next, the Zapotec unique technologies. First, Tunnels of Liao, their Castle Age UT. This gives castles and fortified temples plus 20% HP and double the garrison space. This costs 400 food and 200 wood. This is in reference to the labyrinthine network of underground passages that connected major Zapotec temples at their religious capital Liao, which was called Mitla by their Nahua neighbors. These tunnels may have also served a defensive purpose as well as a ceremonial one, since a lot of these temples also served as fortifications for the Zapotecs in times of war. I'm a little worried that this bonus is a little underpowered. I would be open to cranking it up a little bit to emphasize their fortified temple elements a little more, so tell me what you think I could do to buff it if so. Next, Waya-A, an Imperial Age technology that makes killed units refund 50% of their gold cost. That is substantial. It costs 500 food and 500 stone, pretty expensive, and it applies to all of your units, including siege, ships, monks, and trade cards. Everything. This references the danzantes, which were famous Zapotec murals depicting elaborate dancing rituals, possibly linked with their ancestral hero worship. Waya-A is just a more authentic Zapotec term for them. Death was an incredibly important fixture of the Zapotec religion, even more so than among other Mesoamerican peoples, so I really wanted an effect that allowed death to substantially benefit, or at least substantially recompensate you for your losses. And while this is an extraordinarily impactful technology that would absolutely crack in half virtually any other civilization, this civilization has a very weak late-game tech tree. So it's more of a way to buff up an otherwise garbage late game to a point where it can at least be somewhat sustainable. Of note, the refund is based on the original gold cost. So if you have a monk die, it will net you gold if you have researched all monk technologies. So not only is this very hard to get to, you have to research 12 technologies to get there, have a ton of monasteries constantly producing monks, and then be manually killing all of them. So I doubt it would be overpowered, but it is a perfect representation of their trade-fueled religious hegemony and focus on death and ritual sacrifice. Your monks dying ritualistically is netting you gold. I think that is such a cool combo, and will technically give them infinite gold in late game if your opponent does absolutely nothing for 45 minutes and you can spare the micro resources in intense late game scenarios. So again, I doubt this is overpowered. On from here to the tech tree comparison. The original tech tree from my LAVAnte-Garde Zapotecs build was actually quite solid, so there's not a lot of changes I want to make to it. I'm going to give them the fortified temple, and they're going to lose Onager and the Chakmos technology, which no longer exists in this build. I really like the current tech tree that I gave to them. They have the awful late game to balance out the mighty Waya-A, and other than that, I think they're pretty much perfect. So if you want to compare these changes and take a look at that original tech tree, make sure to check the speaker notes of this slide in the presentation, linked down below, or check out my Zapotecs build linked here. Now, let's talk briefly about themes. The themes I discussed in my original Zapotecs build were not bad, but I've refined them out a little bit. The first one being the first Mesoamerican state. As mentioned, the Zapotecs laid the groundwork for Central American civilization. They were this incredible confluence of trade, cultural, and religious hegemony, and they held an absolute stranglehold on the region while massively enriching themselves. So I knew they had to be some sort of monk civilization that had a really cool, like, gold eco of some kind, which I've represented in Waia'a, and should make for an absolutely devastating, like, stranglehold zone control turtling civilization, which I think I've represented reasonably well. Next theme, the Mecca of Mesoamerica. As a result of their enormous cultural power, they were a pilgrimage site, as I have mentioned, and their major focus on death and ancestor worship set the tone for the rest of Mesoamerica going forward. Leoba, Mitla, remained a destination for pilgrims for centuries after the Zapotecs lost control of it in like 900-ish AD, so much so that 600 years later, during the time of Cortes, Leoba was still considered an incredibly important religious site across all of Mesoamerica. The last theme I'd like to discuss is them outlasting all of their rivals. They had heavily fortified urban centers, especially their major religious hubs, and though they were in decline by the 900s and lost a lot of their major territories, they were still kicking when the Spanish arrived and only ever fully defeated by the Spanish. Even after they were defeated, they still rebelled multiple times, and their rebellions were some of the most successful among any Mesoamerican peoples. So a tanky, turtling, tenacious terror is what I was going for with this design, and I hope you agree that I've achieved it. For their campaign, as you saw in their entry slide, they would be represented by Zacila I. He was the great leader of the Zapotecs during one of their roughest periods in history when they were beset on all sides and facing horrific drought. He fought both the Mixtecs and fellow Zapotecs, plus you could maybe cameo the Chontals and the Aztecs to represent some of the more adjacent powers too. Some other strong considerations, however, would be Cosihoeza, as well as Tela and Teolao, which I mentioned in my original build. Next, to touch upon their flavor, the lovely aesthetic details that make Age of Empires builds special. Their ensign is a Zapote tree in a skull, done in traditional style with the green color representing the jade that mattered so much to them. This is a mild update of my last official design. The architecture is Mesoamerican, unless we get a Oaxacan architecture set, which I would love but doubt, and their wonder would be the great temple of Daniban. Their castle would be this illustration that Ahmicqui found for me. He said it looks reasonably authentic, and I think we need some more variety for Mesoamerican castles, so sure, let's use it. Good enough for me, especially because Mesoamerican castles can be very hard to find. And lastly, closing out with the LAVAnte-Garde section, let's talk about some of the stuff that didn't make it into this section of the build, starting with some tech tree adds. None! There really isn't a ton of material on the Zapotecs, not enough that I had anything I was really strongly urged to add, but there were a bunch of potential mechanics that I strongly considered, including many holdouts from my original build, that I really wanted to pay an homage to. None of these are implementable, unfortunately, hence why they're in the LAVAnte-Garde section, but I would highly recommend taking a look through and seeing if there are any that you find compelling. And with that, we move on to the second rework of this DLC video, the Purépecha. They were my 17th ever build on the channel, rather controversial, a weird design even by my standards, and they had many major interference mechanics, which a lot of viewers objected to. I still like quite a lot of this design, but it's far from my best work, and I would give it a C-. Now let's discuss how I have overhauled this civilization's design. The Purépecha are now an archer civilization with the following bonuses. 1. Mills, lumber camps, and mining camps provide between 10 and 25% more speed to villagers within 8 tiles. This is in reference to the extensive economic infrastructure that contributed so substantially to Purépecha prosperity, especially in the Mesoamerican post-classical era. This also pays homage to the refuge-taking practices that are referenced occasionally in regards to Purépecha warfare. Whenever one of their villages was being borne down by enemies, the people would just flee to hidden mountain caves, almost impossible for the invaders to find, making them very, very slippery and giving them a more resistant economy, which hopefully this bonus should represent faithfully. Second bonus, foot archers benefit doubly from Bracer. This is in reference to the massive longbows that the Purépecha were famous for and their emphasis on ranged warfare, specifically using the bow. This gave them a huge edge over their Nahua neighbors, allowing them to outrange their rivals and better skirmish against them, even though their armies didn't have quite as much firepower up close. This is, of course, a very powerful bonus, and since it specifies foot archers, that means it only applies to their archer line and their unique unit. Third bonus, archery range technologies are 50% cheaper. This is referencing, again, their extensive archery tradition, second only to the Chichimecas that allowed the Purépecha to famously retain a substantial leg up over their many neighbors and rivals. Not only copper weapons, which of course they are famous for, but others besides as well. Fourth bonus, fishing ships move 20% faster. The Purépecha had a massive fishing economy. It was almost as important to them as farming, and they actually developed their boat building skills well beyond many of their Mesoamerican contemporaries, meaning that they actually have the best Mesoamerican dock currently in the game. Lastly, their team bonus. Town centers can research blacksmith upgrades and do so twice as fast. This is referencing breakthroughs in metallurgy that the Purépecha were famous for and exported to their many neighbors as well. They were some of the trailblazers in copper technology in Mesoamerica and even were known to have developed bronze. The Purépecha will have all of the non-Mayan regional units that I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation: Jaguar Warrior, Slinger, and Atlatl. But beyond that, they also have two unique units, first of which being the Cuangarieja. This is a hybrid infantry unit trained at the castle for 35 food and 35 gold. It can swap between melee and ranged modes, just like a Wrath. The Cuangarieja's stats are a little bit unusual, kind of plumed archer-ish, if I had to say. They are reasonably tanky, pretty fast, but they don't have great damage output in either melee or ranged mode. Though note, they have a good attack bonus versus archers in melee mode, and while in melee mode, they get bonus pierce armor and speed. They do benefit from the double bracer civ bonus when they are in ranged mode. They do benefit from infantry armor upgrades rather than archer armor upgrades though, so you won't be able to transfer into them smoothly if you were playing arbalests earlier in the game. And their bonus damage taken depends on their mode. Bonus damage for them when it switches to its bow, making it a slippery, hard-to-counter unit that will have great payoffs for those with good micro. To compare it directly to a Wrath, the Cuangarieja is, of course, dramatically cheaper and much harder to counter, but it also has longer range when fully upgraded and a faster training time. However, it is, of course, much less tanky, it has lower damage, and it is slower, so it's far from a straight upgrade. Cuangarieja meant brave man, and they likely served as captains or like elite units of some kind. And the weapon switching here represents the general versatility and combined arms nature of the Purépecha military overall. It's quite likely that plenty of their elite soldiers would have dual-wielded in this way. The Cuangarieja upgrades to Elite in Imperial Age for 750 wood and 500 gold. Not too expensive. With most notably it getting plus 10 HP, less train time, more attack and bonus damage in melee mode, and a little more attack and accuracy in ranged mode. Second unique unit, the Zinzun. This is a pretty unusual unit that replaces the Elite Eagle Warrior upgrade at the Purépecha barracks, which means that like the Elite Eagle Warrior, it is available at the barracks in Imperial Age for 25 food and 50 gold. Upgrading your Eagle Warriors to Zinzun costs 750 food and 750 gold, overall a lot more expensive than Elite Eagle Warrior, and it gives not nearly as good set of stat buffs, with its stats closer to that of an Eagle Warrior than to an Elite Eagle Warrior. However, the Zinzun gains the Obuk ability, removing -1/-1 armor with each strike. Yikes. So to compare it directly to an Obuk, the Zinzun is much faster, and also, of course, good against monks and siege like Eagle Warriors are. But it's way less tanky, it's worse versus infantry and buildings, and it's harder to access with a slower train time, higher upgrade cost, and needing to wait till Imperial Age and upgrading your Eagle Warriors. To compare the Zinzun to an Elite Eagle Warrior, on the other hand, they have their armor rending bonus and are a great complement to the Purépecha Archer Death Ball, but they have worse attack, pierce armor, speed, and bonus damage, as well as a higher upgrade cost. Purépecha weapons were documented as ripping through other Mesoamerican shields and armor on a very regular basis, because of the general technological advantage they had over their neighbors. And the name Zinzun translates roughly to hummingbird, the main patron animal of the Purépecha war god, their version of Huitzilopochtli, who is also represented by a hummingbird, if you didn't know. With the units out of the way, let's talk about their unique technologies. The Purépecha begin with their Castle-Age unique technology, Ocambeja. This makes villagers very slowly generate all resources while working. It costs 250 wood and 500 gold, and the trickle rate is equivalent to 2% of a feitoria. So if you have 100 working villagers, you would have the equivalent of 2 free feitorias, slightly less due to efficiency. Now, this sounds very strong, and that's because it is. The Purépecha will have one of the best late-game economies in the game, and as well they should. The Purépecha were famous for their incredibly efficient regional economy and the prosperity of their homeland. The Ocambeca specifically were tax collectors and regional governors that managed local villagers and provinces, making them absolutely critical to the greater Purépecha economic machine. This also references the general prosperity of Purépecha lands, which were abundant with all kinds of resources. There was not a single economic element that these guys didn't have in spades. And as such, a Castle Age technology that just blanket buffs your economy no matter what you're doing feels like it makes a lot of sense to me. Imperial technology, Purépecha. This makes your castles give bonus work rate to military buildings within 8 tiles, effectively giving you a second conscription for free. This costs 600 food and 300 gold, so maybe it's not for free. But the Purépecha was a military initiation ceremony, the details of which are unknown, but it sounds cool and is a good basis for representing the greater conscription system that allowed the Purépecha to levy very large armies very quickly. Local villages could pay taxes in the form of soldiers, allowing the Purépecha to have a pop-up army in the face of incoming opposition. And it also references the extensive Purépecha fortification network. These guys built honest-to-goodness castles more than almost any other Mesoamerican power, so a castle bonus makes abundant sense for them. Next, to touch upon the tech tree comparison with my original build, once again, I'm actually quite happy with how the original build looked. The only changes I would make is that this version of the Purépecha would gain squires, and they would lose halberdier and the catapult galley and checkmules, which I no longer have as part of LAVAnilla designs. So, to summarize, I'm happy with the original, and I just removed Halb to make their post-Imperial Death Ball a little bit weaker. But I wanted to return Squires to help out the Tsinsun, jump on enemies, and rip off their armor much faster. It is a shame that I have to nerf the dock by removing Catapult Galley. I think that they will still be the best dock in Mesoamerica, but I'd love to give them a longer-ranged bombarding option. Don't worry, guys. A dock rework that gives the Mesos a little more to work with is going to happen in the future. If you want to compare the changes to the original build, check out the speaker notes of this slide linked below, or check out my original Purépecha design linked in the card above now. My voice is fading, so let's get through this as fast as we can. Let's touch upon the Purépecha themes. 1. Outshooting the Aztecs. The Purépecha used the bow way more than any other major Mesoamerican power, way more than I knew when I was originally researching them, and they used self-longbows. This plus their mountainous homeland made them very difficult to invade effectively. They would skirmish with their bows while retreating and giving ground until they hit their fortifications and they just shot you to pieces. So in many ways, they were a very unassailable civilization, which was good because they were next to the Aztecs, who otherwise would have been very good at assailing them. Another major theme to touch upon is the Purépecha prosperity, which you can see in their various eco bonuses. They had a bountiful homeland with tons of resources, and they conquered new territory in search of luxury resources, bringing new villages into their economic sphere, which they integrated far more effectively into their economic engine than most, if not any, other Mesoamerican power I have researched. The last theme, similar to my original build, is military success through innovation. They famously used metal weapons and armor well before their neighbors, and they fortified their territory extensively with these huge border forts which they used to facilitate hit-and-run style skirmishes. A very strong game plan that should give the Purépecha one of the scariest post-imperial death balls of all time, though of course they do still have clear counters and will have a very hard time against siege. Next, to touch upon their campaign, it would have to focus on Tzitsipandquare, which you saw in Arjun's beautiful art. He was the most successful Purépecha leader, pushing its borders to record limits. He fought the Aztecs extensively, but also brushed up against the Chontals and Mixtecs. Tariakuri is another good contender, but he didn't have nearly as good civ diversity, so Tzitsipandquare is by far and away the best choice here. Next, to touch upon flavor for the Purépecha, their ensign is a tasseled shield, which incorporates a copper pendant. The tasseled shield is based on this design here. The copper pendant is a well-known Purépecha artifact. Their architecture would be Mesoamerican, unless we can get a Nahua rework, and their wonder would be the famous Yakata tombs of Tsinsun-san. Their castle would be this gorgeous design by Trirem, who is actually on my Discord server. This, I believe, was originally designed by him for an Incan architecture pack, but Ahmicqui not only thought it looked really good, but also fits pretty well for Purépecha fortification style as well, and so even though it's not a perfect match, it felt like a decent enough fit to work with. So thank you, Trirem, you do awesome work. Lastly, LAVAnte-Garde section for the Purépecha. I actually have quite a few tech tree ads that I considered for them, including their famous Ashamencha sacrifice priests, the Okambeka maybe being a unique unit rather than a technology, as well as the large Trojes house complexes and the Angameha chieftains, which I'm not really sure what effect they would have. But there were a bunch of other potential mechanics I strongly considered as well, most of which come from my original build that I quite liked, but didn't find a way either to implement in the game as of now. So take a look on screen right now if you like, but I say it's time to move on to the final thoughts of this design. My voice is starting to fade. So first of all, too many regionals. You can say it, I know you're going to say it. 5 new regionals, 6 if you count the fortified church overhaul, is definitely a lot, but I stand by this decision. The Meso tech tree is unbelievably sparse and it needs more ads. And I think that 2 to 3 regionals is very likely if and when we do get a Mesoamerican DLC. So if I had to, I guess I would cut the Mayan stuff, but it's cool and it should exist in the game. I also think that the Aztecs could do with a rework. I think that the Chontals are the least likely civilization of the ones that I have in this DLC. I added them because I thought they were cool and added a lot of variety, and also because the Mayans need more love. But I think in reality, an Aztec rework would be a lot more plausible. And I also think that an Aztec rework might make a little more sense in the context of the story for this DLC proposal. The last thought I had is that there are a lot of defensive civilizations on this build. The Mixtecs and Zapotecs are explicitly defensive, and the Purépecha are like kind of turtly. And so I think an official DLC would probably change the designs to like forcibly prevent any playstyle overlap, but I think this would be a mistake. As we saw with the Armenians, trying to force history to fit a contrived design doesn't work. You may notice that 3 of the 4 civilizations in this DLC are archer civilizations. Why is that? Because it made sense. And also because the game, I think, only has 6 or 7 official archer civilizations anyways, so we need more, and Mesoamerica is a perfect place for them. But with that, we come to the end of this Mesoamerican DLC proposal. Thank you so much for watching. Before we sign off, and you don't have to listen to my stuffy voice anymore, let's take a look at the Likeliometer. In my opinion, how likely is it that a Mesoamerican DLC, maybe looking something like this one, could be added to Age of Empires 2 in the not too distant future? And on the Likeliometer for this design, we have a 9.5 out of 10. I think Mesoamerica is the second most likely DLC location we will see over the next year or two. I think East Asia, specifically Manchuria and similar, is more likely, but Mesoamerica is a close second, with West Africa being a more distant third. But that's just what I think. Now I want to hear what you guys think. How'd you like the build? Anything that you think that I missed in these designs? What do you think about some of the balance proposals or alternatives? For example, like the Zapotec fortified temple stuff. And where do you want me to go next in DLC proposals and Civ builds on this channel? I have tons more ideas to share with you, and I can't wait to do so once I stop being frickin' sick. But until then, my name is Robbie Howell, and ciao for now.